Time, though, now to go to, well, we're going to be talking about North Korea. Many things going on there at the moment. Phil Robertson joins me now. He's Deputy Asia Director, Human Rights Watch. Very good to see you this morning, Phil. Thank you for joining me.
Of course.
Interesting comments coming out of Russia at the moment with regards to North Korea. Vladimir Putin vowing to expand his bilateral relations with North Korea. What is the current situation here?
Well, what you have is a group of nations, North Korea, China, Russia, which are finding common cause in opposition to the West. This is a situation where traditionally Russia has used North Koreans in the Far East around Vladivostok and other places on mining projects or timber projects, cutting down forests in the frozen East. Horrible jobs, situation where, these people are really not well taken care of, but they are there to earn money for the North Korean state. They are essentially workers who have been sent out by North Korea. They've been vetted by North Korea, and they're controlled by North Korean cadres that go along with them to make sure they don't run away. And these people are basically working for pennies to the dollar. They may get some money when they return to North Korea, but they're essentially dragooned forced labor that is doing projects that even Russians don't want to do. And that is what we're looking at. Vladimir Putin wants more of that. And the reports are that perhaps some North Koreans might be sent to the Donbass region in Ukraine, although we have not been able to verify that. So,
yeah, I'd heard that, Phil, that there was a request by Vladimir Putin for 1 million North Korean soldiers, which would completely, of course, overwhelm Ukraine. Is that likely to happen? How can North Korea keep an eye on 1 million people who are outside the country?
They won't. And if they sent a major force like that, a lot of those North Korean soldiers would probably defect or run away.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the North Korean government is focused very much on its own security. So it's focused on controlling the people of North Korea. It's also focused on, maintaining the militarized, DMZ down in along this 38th parallel between South Korea and North Korea. They're not going to send soldiers to another country unless Vladimir Putin is prepared to pay, a pretty penny for that. And I don't think that's the case.
Are we creating in the West? Are we creating this sort of triad that's going on here? Russia, North Korea, and China. In as much as my enemy's enemy is my friend. Is that what we are doing? Because the idea that these three nations are going to pally up together, and including Iran, is a possibility, is quite terrifying.
Well, they have been close allies for quite some time, but it's not as simple as just the three governments opposed by the West, deciding that they're going to be close friends and allies. I mean, there is also a great deal of concern in China about North Korea's nuclear tests. There's a concern that North Korea is not necessarily controllable, and it doesn't really listen, even to its friends in Beijing and Moscow. They go their own way, and so. In some ways, China has previously made common cause with other countries around the world who are concerned about a nuclear-armed North Korea and what that means for stability in the East Asia region. And it is a very serious concern. I mean, what happens if Kim Jong-un has the necessary missile technology and decides to put a small nuclear warhead on one of these missiles and fires it somewhere?
Japan.
I mean, well, it could be Japan. It could be South Korea. It could be anywhere. He could fire it into the ocean and have it go off there. Who knows? I mean, this is a person who is focused on using the international community as an enemy to justify his continued control over the North Korean people. It's all about him and his small group of senior people around him preserving their power and maintaining their thumb on the head of the North Korean people.
But this is why President Yoon has made an offer, isn't it, to North Korea for aid, which North Korea desperately needs, although it will never admit it, to abandon the nuclear weapons program. Of course, North Korea has laughed at him.
That's right. And actually, President Yoon, who is a conservative, who was recently elected as the president of South Korea, is someone who the government in the North, is using as a, sort of bully boy to justify again that, South Korean is coming after the North Korean people. And they're going to justify what they're doing by saying that South Korean hostility backed by the U.S. is threatening North Korea. This is all about creating an external enemy to justify the deprivations and the control that the North Korean government imposes on the people of North Korea. It's a very sad game. I mean, I think what we've also seen, and this is the real damning aspects of it, is that the North Korean government, despite the fact that, it claimed for many better part of 2 years that there were no COVID cases in North Korea, has essentially used the COVID pandemic to restrict freedom of movement, to close its borders, to impose great deprivation on the North Korean people. And it's all about, restoring the political control over the local situation in North Korea. Previously there was, markets and other things that were coming up that sort of challenged the North Korean government supremacy. And, all those grassroots sort of mechanisms that were thriving before COVID have all been basically destroyed.
And didn't Kim's sister come out recently and say that he'd been very ill with COVID?
Well, yes, she did say that. And then she said that the reason that COVID came into North Korea was because the South Korean dissidents sent balloons across the border, with messages. I mean, it's so ludicrous that, only the North Korean people maybe believe it. But, this is the line that they parrot, that, the damage to North Korea is all from somewhere else. It's all coming from the international community. It's all coming from South Korea. It's all coming from North Koreans who fled the country and are causing harm. Everybody is at fault except Kim Jong-un and the regime that he leads. And in fact, that's not the case.
But I mean, we don't get much true information out of North Korea, and which must be very difficult for you in Human Rights Watch, because if COVID has done a similar thing in North Korea as it has around the world, then there will have been many deaths. Because the treatments wouldn't have been there. They weren't available in North Korea. But will we ever know what has happened with that?
The likely answer is no. That the reality is that it's a big cover-up. North Korea refused the assistance of the United Nations, their COVAX facility.
Yeah, they were telling people to drink tea, weren't they?
I mean, it's crazy. But what they did, more importantly, was that they basically forced people to not move across provincial lines. And they closed the border with China, where a lot of goods and imports were coming in, including a lot of foodstuffs. So what they did is they created a crisis where people didn't have enough to eat. They didn't have any sort of, health services or anything like that if they got sick. Basically, you're on your own in North Korea. You scramble to survive. And then the government shuts down the borders and says you can't go anywhere, even if you're starving. This is the reality in North Korea, that North Korea will do whatever it wants, regardless of the suffering it inflicts on the people of North Korea, regardless of the human rights abuses that are being inflicted on them, in order to maintain power and to maintain control. And that's one of the worst human rights abusing countries in the world. That government still has over 120,000 people in gulags in the mountains, where they're basically being literally worked to death. I think what's going to happen is when something finally changes in North Korea and the doors open and we can actually see what was happening, we'll realize that this was one of the worst rights abusing governments in modern history.
Yeah, but it won't be the first time we've heard about North Koreans having to eat grass, for example. The problem is, though, isn't it, that if something were to happen to Kim, his sister seems to be more radical than he is, and she would be the likely replacement for Kim. And how do we ever get the doors to open in North Korea?
Well, I think what's going to happen is if, in fact, we could persuade China to somehow open the borders and allow people from North Korea to flee the country, that if people were able to get out and tell the story about what was happening, which was happening previously. I mean, we had 2011, 2012, as many as 3,000 to 4,000 North Koreans fleeing the country every year and coming out with the stories about what had happened to them, that really sort of caused a body blow to North Korea's legitimacy. And it really has undermined the North Korean government in the eyes of the North Korean people, who now are not really taken in by the propaganda anymore.
But doesn't that just strengthen Kim further when it's kind of like the Donald Trump effect, where you cry fake news, that for Kim, people leaving and then having a go at North Korea, he'll just go, you see, this is what I'm telling you. They're all telling lies about us. It plays into his hands.
Well, but the thing is, what was happening was the North Koreans who had fled the country were basically communicating back into the country what was actually the outside world was really all about. So there was a sort of alternative narrative that was coming in. And part of what he's done, in addition to closing the borders, he's trying to shut down the information that was leaking into North Korea.
Right.
He claimed that, we want the breeze. There was a metaphor like a mosquito net, where he said, like, we want the breeze to come through, but we want to keep the mosquitoes out. And then by that, he meant he wants to keep out not only the people who are coming into North Korea to sort of talk about something different, but also the people who are smuggling in, for instance, videos of like South Korean soap operas or Western movies. These were coming in those little flash drives, those little thumb drives were being smuggled in, and people were watching them. And people said, well, this is what the outside world really looks like. It's not what Kim Jong-un and his sister say it's about.
Yeah.
And we believe what we see from the information received. And now what he's trying to do is trying to say that anybody who has these kind of information, has these kind of thumb drives, will be sent to the gulag. And, they're cracking down. And the international community, distracted by COVID, distracted by other things, is really not paying the kind of attention that they need to put the pressure on China and North Korea to change.
Is there anything that anyone can do? You say about China just opening that border, but sanctions don't work. Again, they play into Kim's hands, because he just then says, look at the horrible West, like Russia says the same thing. Look, it's because of the West that you've got these sanctions. It's not my fault. It's not our fault. Is there anything that the international community could ever do to force North Korea to change?
Well, I think what we need to do is we need to be much more vocal on the international stage about North Korea. What has happened is that everybody's become concerned about his nuclear weapons, which are, of course, a serious concern. But that has meant that people have pushed the human rights issue off the table. Yeah. They're not talking about that. They think, oh, geez, we don't want to do anything that's going to anger him or piss him off.
It's the same with China, isn't it, though?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, if you're talking about at some point that you're going to have a reunification of South Korea and North Korea, you've got to talk truth to power here. And you can't necessarily expect that a dictatorial regime is going to change its spots just overnight. You've got to basically be talking about these issues. You've got to be pressing them on these issues. We've urged, for instance, there was up to 2016, there was an annual dialogue at the UN Security Council about human rights in North Korea, which, of course, made Pyongyang very unhappy. But this was something that was done with the support of 9 of the 15 UN Security Council members, because that's what they needed to get the agenda item on the public agenda. And that kind of discussion then has knock-on effects that people are saying, okay, we need to do something now. We need to do something next. What are we gonna do? I mean, what we have to do is we have to recognize that there's a lot of campaigning and organizing that has to be done. to raise these issues of North Korean human rights back out of the darkness and really sort of say, okay, it's not, everybody knows it's bad, but they don't know the details.
Yeah.
We need to get the details out there.
I couldn't agree with you more. And these are human beings who are being treated in the most appalling fashion. Phil, thank you. I really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I hope we get to speak again soon. Phil Robertson, Deputy Asia Director of the Human Rights Watch. Stay with us here on talkTV. It's over to your calls next.